Hotep, and welcome once again to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel Leader, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks of Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm here once again with my co-host, Michael Graves, aka Big Mike.
Namaste, brother. Namaste. It's good to see you and hear from you, brother.
Yes, sir. It's good to be back for another edition of Community Cop because this is where truth and real talk occurs. As is customary, you all know, we open up with our historical piece, and we have three events we want to talk about today. First, it's the birthday of Medgar Evers, who was born on 7/2/25. Also, Denmark Vesey, who was born in 1822. And this is also the anniversary of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Michael, why don't you touch on all three subjects?
Okay, let me just say that Medgar Evers will be eternally indebted to him because he gave his life for our ability to vote, to register, to destroy segregation. He fought white supremacy his own way. Certainly, he was killed by a coward lurking in the behind some bushes. He was shot and killed, and it was a tragedy because he was a real civil rights leader. He was the field marshal for the NAACP, and he was in very, very troubled waters working in Mississippi. You know, in today's, it's kind of easy to be a civil rights leader. Most of them enjoy million-dollar incomes, all the major civil rights organizations. But at that time, he was just making do. He had a family, a wife, and children. And as he drove up in front of his house and got out the car and was walking up his steps, he was fired at by a lowlife, cowardly Klan member, which ended his life in his wife's arms. So we are internally indebted to such a great man and somebody so courageous to work the way he worked, and in just the fashion in which he did it. He insisted on more time, and every time the rights of public service access is that every time the KKK got on and they were regulars on the TV broadcast, he would insist on getting on and countering what they said and making our position clear on the things that were germane to Black existence. So long live that spirit, and we salute Medgar Evers for his contribution.
And Michael, it's peculiar that you talk about the contrast with civil rights leaders back then and the dangers that they faced, along with the lack of support, financial support that they received. When you look at today's so-called civil rights leaders, better coined civil rights leaders, many of them, as you stated, are millionaires. Many of them are sponsored by Fortune 500 companies. Many of them receive donations. Many of them receive claim from members of the status quo. Some of them have television programs, national radio programs, and this wasn't what individuals who engage in the civil rights of African Americans received back then. They never received the support from the status quo that today's civil rights leaders receive. And I might add that they got more accomplished sincerely on behalf of African Americans, whereas today you see us stuck in mud. You see many of these civil rights leaders and these civil rights organizations responding to incidents as opposed to being proactive. And many times the role that they play is not advancement of civil rights. So I thank you for pointing that out, because when you talk about the sacrifice that Medgar Evers faced, not only physically, financially, because as you stated, he had a family, you see the genuine intentions of such a person, and Martin Luther King and others who gave their life, in service of our people.
Yes, white folks were definitely threatening him, and he would actually go down to the TV station and demand equal time, and that was he was putting his life in danger. So long live that spirit. And as you pointed out, what we're saying is that now they have free access to the airwaves. because they are supported, as you pointed out, by Fortune 500 corporations. So they get all the time they want plus extra.
Right, and many of these corporations are the same corporations that oppress, exploit our people, not only in Americas, but internationally as well.
Absolutely.
So,
now, with respect to Denmark Vesey was an enslaved African who came by way of Bermuda, and that by way of Western Africa. His real name was Telemark. So we call him Denmark Vesey out of familiarity, but his real name was Telemark. That's the name that he was born with, and he never forgot it. And so in any event, what he was able to do was he won his freedom in a lottery. And after winning it in a lottery, he was a pastor at an AME church in Charleston, South Carolina. Yes, that same Charleston, South Carolina AME church that Dylan Roof went into and killed 9 people in. So that tradition is still there to this day. So I would just say that Denmark Vesey, he had a plan of insurrection that would have freed many, many hundreds of Africans in the surrounding area. Actually, it included thousands. The plan was to free South Carolina, period, from the chains of slavery. And so he plotted it out. And of course, as always, some turncoat race trader gave him up at the last moment. He was arrested, but luckily all the people that he had under him, all of his lieutenants, were not killed because he had what would be commonly called today a cell structure, where everybody was given specific instructions on what role they was going to play, and they didn't know who was below them or beneath them or at the sides of them. So all the people were not executed when he was executed. But, you know, we have a situation where those that were Peter Boyes, what's his name? I always say it wrong. And Harold, if Harold was still with us, Harold will, but he would demand that I get it right. So the people who it was, they were able to identify some of the people, but Peter Poyes and Gula Jack, that's the other name, Gula Jack and Peter Poyes, they were executed, and he told them, keep your heads up during the whole thing, because that's how proud he was as a Black man to free other Black men. And so he didn't yell, scream, or nothing. He told them, keep your heads up. And that's what he did. He died like a man because he was freer than he was ever at that moment when he told them to keep your heads up.
All right, the last historical event on 7/9/1868, the 14th Amendment.
Well, it goes without saying, most of us know that that's the amendment that gave us citizenship. So they could no longer debate, were we citizens or not? If you're born in America, you're a citizen, and this is why other people try to get here and have their children born here so they can maintain American citizenship. But that law was put into in 1868 specifically for us because white people were still debating that we were not citizens in America. So constitutionally, it took an amendment to ensure after the Civil War that we would now be citizens and would not be a part of any relocation or colonialization program where they could just take us and move us anywhere because we were free.
All right. And connected to those historical pieces, especially the last one, was recently in this nation, they had a holiday which is celebrated throughout the country called the 4th of July. Some of us know and heard of Juneteenth as well. The 4th of July is called the Day of Independence. That's what the 4th of July is. And June 19th, 1865 was the African independence. So there's debates in some circles in our community. Should African Americans celebrate July 4th as Independence Day, or should we celebrate June 19th as Independence Day? That's a very a good debate. I think our ancestors, and I think Frederick Douglass articulated it best, that July 4th means nothing to the African American. He might have said Negro at that time, because our people on July 4th, 1776 were still enslaved. So when you talk about Independence Day, it definitely was not an Independence Day for African Americans, for our people. So why should we celebrate a day which is really a mockery to independence as it relates to our kith and kin? Juneteenth, 1865, many of you know that was the day that General Gordon Granger marched into Texas and notified Africans that were enslaved in Texas that according to the president's Emancipation Proclamation, they were actually free. So throughout Texas and throughout the South, and for a long period of time, that was the African Americans' Day of Independence. That was a day, June 19th, that was celebrated as Independence Day for African Americans, because indeed it was a day where we were, given independence. When you look at July 4th, that was specifically, even though one of the premier authors, Thomas Jefferson, wrote that we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, he was referring to white men. As a matter of fact, a lot of people know there was a great debate as it relates to the Declaration of Independence, where there was supposed to be a section on slavery. There was a heated debate on the wording of the Declaration because it originally included the denunciation of the slave institution. But of course, most of the white males who themselves had enslaved Africans eliminated that section from the Declaration, and they went forward with this vain declaration that only referred to white people. So when there's a debate, should we celebrate July 4th or June 19th as Independence Day? July 4th, our people weren't independent. They weren't given freedom. So why should we celebrate that day as Independence Day? That's specifically for white men and white women. What is your viewpoints on that, Mike?
Well, I agree with what you're saying. I agree with our brother Frederick Douglass, who made that crystal clear in 1852, 13 years prior to freedom. Fred Douglass made it very clear that this land is living in disgrace and shame. He said that it is the most deplorable place on the planet. This is what he said in front of very powerful white men at a festive gathering. He said to Mr. President, he said to all the people who was there, men and women alike, he said, how can you toast, eat, and have a festive event while my brothers in the South are in chains under the whip? This is Fred Douglass talking, not 100 blacks in law enforcement. This is Fred Douglass saying in 1852. Now, he was one of the most brilliant speakers that we've ever had, but he did not have a formal education. And he understood that very well. In 1852, 13 years prior, that July the 4th was hypocrisy to us. You used to use his quote about America on the world stage is a land of savages. To imprison a man, imprison his wife, and to imprison his children. That's savage. He said it's not civilized, it's savage. Consequently, I agree with him that we should not celebrate July the 4th. We should not endanger. Children should not be using fireworks and having all these spectacular events on the 4th. And if you do decide to have a cookout and get together with family and friends, then you should have that understanding that we are celebrating this our way. We should remember the Fannie Lou Hamers, and we should remember Medgar Evers and all of those on that day. You know, we should Sojourner Truth and Malcolm, everybody. We should remember all those who fell while fighting for us. We should remember Francis Quest Wilson, Amos Wilson. We should remember Dr. Bennett, Dr. Clark, so many others. Wherever you at, however deep your history goes back, if you want to go back to slavery times or the civil rights movement, where some people might be, then fine, celebrate them. Don't celebrate white, red, white, and blue. Don't garb yourself in the flag. Understand that that flag was a flag of injustice, of terror to us. So we should not celebrate that. Now, on the other hand, Juneteenth, we should celebrate Juneteenth because Black men were involved in that. Black men, over 200,000 fought in the Civil War. The thousands that went with Granger to Texas. Now, it is a lie when you say that somehow Granger made a pronouncement and everybody walked away from their plantations free. That's a myth. That's just revisionist history. There were Blacks, there were Union soldiers already located in other parts of Texas because they were fighting the Civil War. Consequently, Black people knew that they were free, but the slave masters in Texas, which is as far west as one can imagine in the Deep South, they were able to maintain their plantations and keep slaves on it. So it wasn't the pronouncement from Granger, it's the fact that all those Black troops that were there were ready. Their attitude was show and prove. Their attitude was show and prove. So that thing was like anybody who want to get it on, let's go. And that's why all of those Confederate soldiers ran. They ran north into Colorado. They ran west into New Mexico. And the majority of them kept running from New Mexico because they were scared that them Black soldiers would travel behind them, that they ran all the way into Phoenix, ran into Arizona, which wasn't even a part of the United States at that time.
Mm. And another, now that you got into the historical part of that conversation, a lot of people also misled to believe that Abraham Lincoln is a great emancipator. When he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, it was only pertaining to enslaved Africans that were in regions that he was leave under control. The regions, the northern states that he did control, he didn't free those African Americans, those enslaved.
That's right.
So his proclamation really fell on deaf ears because it was only pertaining to the enslaved Africans that were in rebellious states. And his goal was to try to weaken those states by making this proclamation. As you stated, most of them just ignored it because he had no influence there. But another important historical piece is that during the Civil War, a lot of plantation owners, a lot of these states were weakened because the men were out fighting and getting their behind whipped. A lot of enslaved Africans took the opportunity to escape even before the pronouncement, because, they took advantage of the situation. But be it as it may, going back to the July 4th and June 19th, I think it's a mockery to the memory of our ancestors if African Americans celebrate July 4th as Independence Day, because that independence didn't pertain to our ancestors. They were still enslaved in this country. So whatever you do on July 4th, you should not celebrate independence because that's independence from white Americans from Great Britain. It has nothing. That's right. That day has nothing to do with our ancestors, has nothing to do with us. As a matter of fact, as you stated when you quoted Frederick Douglass, that day is a mockery to the memory of our ancestors. So we should always remember that.
Right, and I concur, and let me buttress the point you made about rebellious states, because sometimes our people miss that part and agree with white people who say Lincoln was the great emancipator. Lincoln was the man that freed you. It's not true. Lincoln was appealing to the South. He wanted the South to put down their arms, which is why it was a veiled threat when he said, the states in rebellion, if you continue to fight against the Union, if you continue to fight against the federal government, you will lose your slaves that you have. So what you said is so apropos, Noel, when you said that applied to the Emancipation Proclamation, applied to states in rebellion. But the places that he was in control of, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, or Massachusetts, slavery was still going on. It was going on well, it was fine. He was trying to get the South to stop the war. He said he will, his exact words were, I will free every Black man in America to keep the Union together. I will enslave every Black man to keep the Union together. My priority is making America one, preserving the Union. He said he'll do whatever it takes to preserve the Union. He was not going to allow America to become two countries under his watch. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. It was the Emancipation Proclamation applied only to states in rebellion.
Okay, so that's two very important points to remember at this time, that the 4th of July, which is their Independence Day,
that's right,
do with us or our ancestors. And Abraham Lincoln was not the great emancipator. He was a white racist, white supremacist. And he said that he, in his eyes, he preferred that the white race have the preferred position in this nation.
That's right.
All of us being equal and together and Americans, et cetera, et cetera. Most of what you hear in American history is nothing but fantasy.
That's right.
Made up stories. All right, fast forward today. As many of you have heard recently, there was a car chase of a young man named Jaylen Walker as he fled from police and ultimately stopped, jumped out of his vehicle. Officers shot at him over 90 times, hitting him. I think the reports is that he had 60 injuries in his body.
More than
police officers are claiming that a shot was fired. As the police officers were chasing his vehicle, that he fired a shot out of the vehicle. They have a picture of a bright light shining his vehicle. I don't know how they determined that was a shot. One thing I do know is that police officers, today's police officers, are trained when they're in pursuit, one of these aggressive pursuit, or when they're in a wrestling situation. They say things such as stop resisting. They say things as gun, Sean Bell. They say things as shots fired. And this is in advance of any potential situations occurring that you be covered, that you made these pronouncements, that these pronouncements were recorded. Whether or not they're true or not will be debated, down the line. If somebody said he has a gun, if somebody says shots fired, then you can say he moved in such a way that I thought he was reaching for a weapon because it was already out there that he had a gun. In this particular case, when a young man jumped out of his vehicle, 8 police officers opened up the over 90, I think it was, what was it, 93 rounds or 96, Michael?
90 rounds, 60 hits.
90 rounds shot at him is excessive. As I stated, and as reports indicate, that he was unarmed, but of course the police officers are saying that he put his hands close to his waist, where if you're running, I can see that happening. But it's to me, it's unjustified. One of the things that our people always have to be careful of when police have the video and are giving a commentary, you begin to follow their line of thinking. I know there's the clearest picture I've seen of the young man jumping out of the car. You see he had a mask on, which I don't know why he did. But the picture doesn't show his hands. So when the police showed that picture to the public, they conveniently didn't show his whole body outside of the vehicle. They just showed the shoulder area, which I thought was a little significant because it's not important whether or not he did fire a round while he was in the vehicle. I mean, that has some importance. And of course, if that is true, officers want to note that. But the real importance is when he left the vehicle, was he a threat to anyone? Because police officers can only use deadly physical force when they're in imminent danger of death or serious physical injury. But so many people have problems with the number of shots that were fired, him being unarmed, and the number of bullets that hit his body. Michael, what are your comments on this particular situation?
Well, I'm agreeing with basically the way you laid it out, but I'm going to tell you why it is so questionable. I dare say almost everything they reported was almost made up. And I have a reason for it, you know, and maybe we could help people that do not have a law enforcement background to see through these allegations. From the outset, there was a car chase. And in the car chase, it took 2 to 3 minutes. And then allegedly after a car chase, he got out of the car and ran towards a parking lot. He should have stayed in the car till he went to a well-lit area around people. But in any event, we're gonna give him the fact that they chased him for 2 minutes, they claim, almost 3 minutes.
And for a traffic for a traffic infraction.
Right. And it was just because of a broken tail light and a bulb on his license plate. One of the bulbs was out. So they're chasing him. Remember, a broken tail light and one of the bulbs, the little lights on your license plate was out. And this provoked a chase involving 8 police officers. So now they allegedly chase him for 3 minutes. And then at some point he gets out of the car. He gets out of the car, and for every reason, because the audio was muffled. Consequently, you don't know what was said to him, but he started running. Now, how can you start running? And they claim this is how they messed up their lives. This is how they messed up. They claim that they tried to bring him down with a taser. Right. Now, I'm gonna come back to that. They claim that they used a taser to try to bring him down, and only after he kept running, which took 10 seconds or less. After 10 seconds, they all opened up with deadly physical force and shot approximately 90 rounds. Hitting him 60 times. Now, Noel, you're gonna convince me that somebody inside of those 2 to 3 minutes in that car chase, he shot at you with a gun, allegedly. And when he gets out of the car, you're gonna try to bring him down with a taser after being shot at? Are you kidding me? A black man just shot at you with a gun. And now you try to bring him down with a taser. And on what planet is that? What planet?
Facts.
Not Earth, and definitely not Ohio, where I can go through Du Bois, Williams with 68 cars involved in a chase. I can spend the whole rest of the show talking about Ohio police officers and how they treat black folks. But in this particular case, they claim that they chased him for 8 to 10 seconds, and then they all opened up, shooting him with, using deadly physical force from their guns, shot approximately 90 rounds. They claim that they had to go back to find a shell casing in between that 3-minute ride, which is child's play for a police officer, to find a shell casing. And they claim that a gun was found near the driver's seat, a gun, a fully loaded magazine, and a wedding ring. Now, with eight police officers in an isolated area, I think they creative enough or intelligent enough to find a gun between 8 of them. They can find a gun, they can find a wedding ring, and they can find a loaded magazine, and then they can backtrack and find a shell casing. But you can't convince me if they got shot at in a car, they're gonna approach him in those first 10 seconds when he gets out of the car with a stun gun, a taser. It's not gonna happen. So I know they were lying, and they made it all up, and their bosses know that they were lying, which is why they are all on administrative leave right now. Because the bosses know that look, come on now, and their story was so weak that they just made it up. And so they did have a press conference, and they did defend those police officers, the union and other bosses, but the facts are they know that this was a dirty shooting.
Right, and Michael, you bring up some very interesting points. The mere fact that the officer used a taser, that means he's definitely in close proximity to the individuals that he's dealing with, definitely close enough to see whether or not he has a weapon in his hand. And as evidence have come out, everyone knows he didn't have a weapon. Now there's question whether or not there was a weapon in the car, but definitely when he exited the vehicle, the officer was close enough to shoot him with a taser. And as you say to Michael, if anybody is fear of a suspect having a weapon, who's already, according to them, used a weapon against them, there's no chance in the world a police officer is going to utilize a stun gun in that situation unless he knows the person is unarmed, unless he sees that the person doesn't have a weapon in his hand. For the officers that have that many hits, 60, many of us know the hit ratio of police officers. For him to be hit that many times mean that all of these police officers were in close proximity to the individual. 60 hits, that means that they were very close. They were very close enough to see his hands. They were close enough to at some point, as you're shooting at your target, you're observing your target. At some point in time, you should realize that this individual is hit. This individual is going down. This individual is no longer a threat, but only an individual who is just so locked into emptying his weapon would continue to shoot over 90 shots. Highly unreasonable and highly problematic. Now, the police officers, as you stated, the officials, the mayor, they are, they're given their view of the shooting, and they're given their interpretation, and people are going along with it. But as you correctly stated, for the officer to use a taser at someone they claim shot at them immediately after they exit the vehicle, highly unlikely if they really felt that they were shot at, if they really felt the individual had a weapon, he was in possession of a weapon.
Now he ran 10 seconds of running would cover at least 50 yards or 40, 50, 60 yards that they claim the chase was. If 8 of them were able to get out of their cars, so that's a minimum of at least 4 cars if they were traveling in couples. So that's at least 8 cars. They were all chasing him, and they all started shooting. We don't know at what point the body cams were cut off, or we don't know what point they was cut on. All we heard was the sounds of fire. They were firing. So we don't know what's happened and what made him run. We don't know. So it's highly suspect. And I think that department knows it. It's highly suspect because if you got out of your car, you got out of your car to surrender. So you knew you hadn't done anything wrong. You might have known, or you might not have known about the tail light. But in any event, if you had to overcome fear first that you were being chased, at some point you did stop the vehicle. We don't know what verbal instructions went down or what threats, what it might have been. But in any event, that he didn't have to die. And if a police officer is close enough to shoot a taser at him, they claim they did that, then what were the other 7 officers doing while one police officer shot his taser? What were the other 7 doing? Now, obviously, all of their reports are going to reflect that one officer tried to bring him down with a taser. Why wasn't it successful? It's the summertime, so he didn't have on a leather jacket or anything that couldn't be penetrated. What he had on, a t-shirt or a shirt? So they couldn't explain that. And so they all opened up on him and shot 90 rounds. That was truly a modern day lynching. It was just unconscionable to do something like that. And this is why they know it wasn't a just shooting, but they've administratively put them all on leave, all 8 of them.
And many people in our community, of course, take issue with the manner by which police officers, white police officers primarily, apprehend Black suspects, guilty or innocent. Many times it results in death. You know, as in this particular case, our brother Jaylen Walker was unarmed when the police officer shot him. But when you look at Robert Cremo, a story that we will touch on if we have time, who had murdered 6 people and shot 30 others. When he was apprehended by a police officer, of course, you know, he wasn't killed.
He was killed, right? Wasn't he killed?
Wasn't even shot at.
You sure?
I don't even think he had a scratch. And then there's another case last week, Lance Storrs in Kentucky. He murdered 3 police officers. 3 police officers he murdered, and he was apprehended. Now, some people may say, well, listen, when the white guys, and we know Dylan Ruth, who murdered our brothers and sisters in the church, he was apprehended, didn't have a scratch on him. Matter of fact, the officers even took him, I think, to Burger King.
Yes.
But as it relates to Lance Storrs, recently, he murdered 3 police officers in Kentucky. When he was apprehended, wasn't shot. Some people may say, well, listen, maybe the Black guys are resisting. Well, this guy is clearly Storrs. He clearly resisted, because if you look at his mugshot, he had a couple of black eyes and a bloody face. So that means there was a physical resistance, but he wasn't shot and he wasn't killed. So you can go, so a lot of members in our community take issue with the fact that when officers are in pursuit of African Americans, many times the result is death or being shot at.
There's no doubt about it that there's a disparity with respect to how investigations and arrests are conducted. There's no question about it that white guys can literally do anything. As a matter of fact, they can attack a police officer with a knife. They can have a gun in their hand, and the police officers won't fire. They'll tell them to drop the weapon. And so they have the courtesy, or I dare say the luxury, of deciding on dropping the weapon. A Black man does not have that option to drop a weapon. As a matter of fact, a Black man with his hands up can get killed without a weapon in his hands.
Right.
So, you know, and there's a long history of that. As you well know, in New York City alone, a Black man with a comb or a hairbrush or a candy bar in his hand, you know, you don't have a chance of making it. You're going to get shot. And they'll mistake a wallet, you know, what they claim, and, you know, a wallet, candy bar, hairbrush, a comb, or on Christmas with the case Keys in his hand on Christmas Day in Canarsie. It was that with William something. Its name is on the tip of my tongue.
And the explanation by officers is always that they thought it was a weapon. And this is, and mind you, viewers, we're not only talking about Black civilians, we're talking about Black police officers as well, who've been murdered by white police officers. And this is on-duty officers as well as off-duty officers. So, you know, the situation is that white police officers respect the humanity of white people, whether or not they're guilty or innocent, whether or not they murdered police officers, you know, they respect, and they have a respect for their humanity, where they don't respect the humanity of African Americans, be they men, women, or children. And I often say and then we're going to get to you in a second, Mike. I often say that members of the African American community, we have to ask ourselves, do you think these white police officers, these white boys who don't want to live in your neighborhood, who don't want your kids going to the same school as their kids, who don't want your sons dating their daughters, do you think these white boys actually, white girls actually come into our community to patrol and respect and to serve? Do you really think that? That hasn't been the historical record. There's been animosity, there's been disrespect. So I think it's incumbent on members of our community to make an adjustment. Every time you see videotapes of a lot of these shootings, if you see 20 police officers, 19 of them will be white. In our neighborhood, in our community, the white members of the white community will never accept having a majority Black police department. We're the only community foolish enough to allow this to have on. And I've been on the police department, so I can tell you the level of animosity, the level of utter hatred. They're not afraid. They hate African Americans, many of them. That's the only way I can interpret the level of disrespect to people you never met before, people who haven't done nothing wrong, the level of the abuse and disrespect. You have to just have total disregard for their humanity. But what community would allow this adversarial, this invasion of outsiders? People who don't live in our community would never want to live in our community, call it a jungle. What community would allow these people to have this kind of authority, the ability to take a life of our sons and daughters? It's preposterous to me.
Well, brother, why don't you tell us about that lieutenant and the white woman that he stopped in a car stop?
Right, this is the white lieutenant. Let me see, where was this at? What's his name? I'll get his name in a minute. You know, the white lieutenant.
Give us the scenario.
Right, yeah, he had a car stop, and he stopped a white woman. And the white woman was nervous because it was a police officer. And he attempted to comfort her and said, listen, don't be afraid. We only kill.
No, bro, well, no, wait. He asked, as tradition, license and registration, right. And she was too nervous to get it.
Right, because she was afraid. She thought he might shoot her or might harm her. And he said, basically, don't be afraid. We only kill Black people. And when he said only kill Black people, he really meant we only murdered Black people. Because white police officers will shoot a white man if the white man is firing a weapon at them.
Right.
They will definitely shoot him. They definitely will kill him. But what he meant is we only murder Black people. Like if you sit in your car and you go for your license and you get shot, that can only happen to a Black person. We wouldn't do that to a white person. He was recorded on video saying it, and he was forced to resign. But that's highly an inappropriate statement. But it's an insight into how these people think. And there's been other cases of white police officers saying that they wish there's a race riot because they want to murder Black and kill Black. These are the people that patrol in our community. These are people that have awesome power, awesome authority, and we sit around and allow them for generations to invade our community and treat us with such levels of disrespect. And then we wonder why situations such as this happen, where a brother, leaving the car, whether he's guilty or innocent, run out of the car unarmed, and is shot at 90 times and hit 60 times. That's reminiscent of what happened to Amadou Diallo.
Well, you know yourself that the white woman was afraid to reach into her dashboard to get her license and registration. He had to remind her, he said, you're white. He said, miss, he said, relax, you're white. Right. He said, we only kill Black people. So he had to remind her of her whiteness and that she has status in America. She has white privilege, and that he will allow her to reach into a dashboard without shooting her. So a Black person does not get that courtesy.
Right.
You have to wait until they tell you license and registration. At that point, you have to say, which we teach and what to do when stopped by the police. You tell them that your license and registration is in your dashboard, and then they will give you permission to reach and get it and keep your hands in sight. So she was just so afraid. So he was basically admitting to her that Black people don't get the same privileges that white people get. Right. And he reassured her she has white skin privilege, and take your time, get your license and registration. Right. And after she handed it to him, of course, everything was copacetic.
And implied in that also is, listen, if you was Black, there's a possibility that I would kill you. but we don't
Right.
kill. You don't have to worry about it. We only kill black people. This is what a uniformed lieutenant stated, and I think that's horrific. All right, another story that happened, police story. A young man named Randy Cox in New Haven, Connecticut. He was arrested by police officers, and in the course and discourse of being transported to the prison detention center, the officer slammed on the brake. Brother Randy Cox, who was in the arrest wagon, slammed his head against the metal door and he broke his neck. Now, when he arrived at the, he had complained of being in pain. He was calling out for help. The driver of the wagon stopped, looked at him. He said, I can't feel my arms. I can't feel my hands. An ambulance was called, but the transport officer, continued on to the detention center where other officers ignored his complaint of injury, of pain, saying that he can't move.
All right, I can't move you, so I have to, hold on, I'm gonna have to go get an ambulance.
Listen, no.
Huh?
Yes, but understand.
Go ahead.
I fall. I cannot move my arms.
All right, do not move. I can see moving your arm.
Hands.
No.
They ignored
Okay.
his complaint,
All
which
right,
is
hold
not
on.
what police officers are trained or supposed to do. They dragged him out of the wagon by his legs. They threw him roughly into a wheelchair. And if you throw him in a wheelchair, that means he can't. According to you, he's not willing to walk.
If
He
you're gonna
can't.
drag me, go across home.
All right.
But I like it. I'll let her relax for a picture.
All right, there you go.
Almost there. You're almost there. You gotta get your shoulders out. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Stand up. There we go. All right.
Get up.
How you making out? Ready? Actually, go get that shit.
Get the,
Huh?
You ain't cracking. You just drink too much. No, you drink too much.
At that particular point, the officers have the responsibility to call PMS. If he's faking, so what? As a professional, and you're responsible for the safety of all of your prisoners, they should alert it, the medical assistance if you have to put him in a wheelchair. But at no time did any of the officers doing the observation of his condition, you can see his head literally, moving around as if he didn't have totally control, because his neck was broken. Officers just totally ignored his complaints of pain, his complaints of not being able to move. They showed such insensitivity, such inhumanity. And as I say, that white police officers respect the humanity of white people. They don't respect the humanity of African Americans. He was taken out of a wheelchair, thrown in the cell, laid on the floor. His feet were shackled. And this is such a level of not only professional, but inhumane treatment. The brother right now is paralyzed from the shoulders down. And we call on these police officers to be arrested, to be fired, to be prosecuted, to be sentenced, and to be imprisoned in the appropriate prison facility. Like, we have to throw that on now, in order for this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Not only want them to get sentenced, we want them to go to the appropriate, not a cushy jail, but a state jail where they belong. So we'll keep our eye on this particular story. But looking at the video, Michael, the level of inhumanity that the officers showed towards this young man who was apparently experiencing some difficulty. Even if they didn't know exactly what it was, all they had to do was take a few seconds to observe, but the lack of respect for his humanity is telling. It's not even debatable.
It's reminiscent of Freddie Gray.
Facts.
For one thing, when Freddie Gray ran into a desolate area, it was like an alley or something, he came out not being able to walk. So obviously the police officers tuned him up while he was behind whatever wall structure it was in that alley. If you go in and you could walk and you come out and now you can't walk and they dragging you out, something transpired while you was in that alley.
Right.
Now they slam you into a large vehicle and you endure what is called a rough ride, because they cuff your hands behind your back. So if you fall forward, you can't use your hands to brace your fall, not even a little bit, because it's behind your hands. And if they shackle you, and they face you in such a way that every time they stop the car, you're gonna slide forward and you're gonna hurt yourself. So they've changed those regulations now in Georgia because of this incident. It was embarrassing. When they change regulations, it's not so much the officers involved, but it's also the department itself is involved. So now they're gonna use you to transport with regular police cars as opposed to the type of vehicle they use when they have a lot of people. They're gonna use regular police cars now that that has seatbelts, as opposed to what that guy experienced. And you also got to consider that the inhumanity, as you pointed out, that they all experienced when he said he was hurt. They kept driving, they ignored his pleas for medical assistance. And even when they got them there, they told him to come on out, and he said he can't move. You saw the way they pulled on his legs and dragged him out and threw him into a wheelchair. You know yourself, when a person is hurt, if they claim that the injury involves their head, neck, or their vertebrae, their back, you have to be very ginger, and you use medical people because you don't want to move them. If they're on the ground already, you leave them there until the medical people come. And so that they could make sure that that spine is not disrupted, the neck vertebrae is not disrupted in any way, because at that point, anything can happen. So it's hard to explain, but you have to hold that person there. They're not in a position to escape. They're cuffed and everything. You wait until the proper medical attention. So in this last 5 minutes that we have to understand that that was inhumane. And I agree with you that all of them should be immediately suspended, and they should go after everybody that was there that played a role in this. They should go after their jobs.
Okay, including the supervisors. Let's try to fast forward through a couple of stories. There's a couple of closing stories we want to talk about. In Savannah, Georgia, Sorty Lee, he was a brother that was stopped by the police officers. He had a weapon on his person. He informed the officer that he had a weapon on his person. He even showed the police officers his license. Now, up until that point, everything is good, but something went awry. Somehow, the police officer wound up chasing him. And Michael, why don't you inform our audience about this particular story?
Well, in this story, how do you identify you have a legal weapon?
Right.
And somehow that translates into you, and you even identify that the gun is on your hip, and somehow now you get shot and killed.
Right.
It smells. Something about this isn't right. I mean, you know, the same thing happened with the person who was in the car with his fiance and their daughter. The same thing happened where he identified and said that he has a legal weapon, and the police officer started shooting.
Right.
And said, don't touch it, and started shooting. So in this particular case, I don't understand how you can identify and show you have a license. You show the license, you identify the area that your gun, your concealed weapon is at, and somehow it translates in you being killed. It makes absolutely no sense.
Exactly. And he was not even accused of committing any crime or suspicious of committing any criminal act. And he complied with the police officer's orders. He informed the police officer I have a weapon. He showed the officer his license. And as you stated, somehow this result, this is not going to pass the smell test. And, you know, like as you stated in our past story, we don't know the conversation the officer had with him. The officer might have said something that alarmed him, you know, and the level of fear that members of our community have of police officers is genuine, because as that police lieutenant we talked about earlier said, we kill Black people. This is what a police officer said. You know, so I don't know what spooked this brother that caused him to believe that he had to leave after he identified himself and told the officer I have a legal weapon, but evidently something happened in that particular situation was, as you said, it unfortunately wound up into his death, Mike. All right, we want to talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Our leadership got to get better. That's all I would tell you. We got to have better people in leadership and stronger organizations.
And real quick, and our leadership have to stop saying we need more training and we need to change policy. That's garbage. It's not a lack of policy and a lack of training that's causing these incidents. It's racism, white supremacy. It's a hatred of African Americans, and it's a lack of respect for our humanity. Because if training was the issue, if lack of policy was the issue, every incident that happened for the last 30 years, we're going to do more training and we're going to get some policy changes. If that was the case, then it should be happening to white folks as well. It should be happening to other ethnic groups, but it happens to African Americans because the problem is racism, white supremacy, a lack of respect for our humanity. We want to talk about a last story. Yeah, I'm sorry. Was that?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know yourself that off duty, if you're off duty or retired, if you're stopped by a police officer, you must immediately identify yourself. To do anything other than identify yourself puts you in peril. I don't care who you think you are when you're in uniform. When you're out of uniform and a white police officer stops you, your black behind better identify yourself right away.
Well, that's the policy. I'm not certain if that's the safest thing to do, because sometimes if you tell a white officer these days that you have a weapon on you, he might take advantage of that, shoot you, and remove and say you moved away when you went for your weapon. I mean, things that are occurring today are so crazy that, it's like a win. You really have to see who you're dealing with. If you inform the officer, I have a weapon, I have a license for my weapon. If you wind up dead, that's problematic to me. But Michael, we want to talk about the Patriot Front before we close down. They had a march, over 100 members of the Patriot Front marched in Boston recently. Michael, tell us about that story.
Well, I'll just say for the record real quick that they marched 100 strong in Boston on July the 2nd. These are the same people that marched in Washington, D.C. in December. They marched at various locations. The Southern Poverty Law Center says that now they're one of the largest white supremacist organizations. They were involved in Virginia in 2017 in the Unite the Right. A sergeant, and that's according to not only the Southern Poverty Law Center, but the Boston Herald reported that they were marching 100 strong, and a Boston police sergeant detective said that they beat the man down, and while they beat him down, they were hollering out, what were they hollering out? Liberty, life, liberty, and justice, something like that, while they were beating him and stomping him to the ground.
You talk about a black man, but closing comments, Michael.
With respect to time, black man, black woman, protect the black child, accept your own, and be yourself.
Yeah, on behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank you, our viewing audience, once again for watching. Don't forget, you can catch recorded programs on YouTube. Just punch up Community Cop. We'd like to thank our engineers, Big D tonight, Veronica Kit, Nat Woods, Sheila Berry, our producers, engineer. We'd like to thank you once again, our viewing audience. Lenny Lou, Kitty Cat, Little More, I love you all. See you next Tuesday. Peace.